I seen this before? Let me think. Oh, yes, I remember. This is just the way your father looked before he died.
Did you know there's a hidden realm at the edges of the Pride Lands where forgotten customs echo through secret caves? A mysterious group of lions lives there with their own unique way of life. But why haven't we heard about them before? Get ready, because we're about to uncover the hidden history of the Outsiders. We'll take you back to when Mufasa ruled and show you these lions who chose a different path. Their story intertwines with Scar's rise to power and Simba's return in ways you won't believe. It's time to see the Pride Lands from a whole new perspective. What if everything we thought we knew was just the beginning? Okay, so let's talk about the Pride Lands before everything went crazy. But did you know that the Outsiders weren't always outsiders? They actually lived right there in the Pride Lands with Mufasa's pride. Can you believe it? Picture this. Mufasa's ruling over this beautiful kingdom. Everyone's happy, the sun is shining, and the circle of life is doing its thing. But there's more going on here than we thought, because hidden away near Pride Rock, there's this whole other group of lions, and they've got their own way of doing things. These lions weren't big fans of all of Mufasa's rules. They had their own ideas about how to live and hunt and raise their cubs, and it caused some drama in the Pride. I mean, can you imagine having two different groups of lions trying to live together but doing everything differently? It was like trying to mix water and oil. Mufasa was a smart king. He knew he had to keep everyone happy, so he tried to keep the peace between the two groups, even though they were so different. But it was tough. The other lions had these secret caves near Pride Rock, and they decorated them with claw marks and teeth everywhere. It was like their way of saying, hey, we're tough, don't mess with us. And their hunting was so different from what we're used to seeing in the Lion King movies. They liked to hunt at night when everything was dark and spooky, and they were all about being sneaky instead of those big group hunts that Mufasa's pride, did you know, the ones where they all run together and take down a wildebeest. But the really interesting part is how they raise their cubs. Oh man, those little guys were tough from day one. They learned how to fight and hunt way earlier than the other cubs in the Pride. It was like lion cub boot camp or something. Can you imagine tiny Simba trying to keep up with these fierce little cubs? As time went on though, the differences between the two groups just kept getting bigger and bigger. It was like this invisible line was being drawn in the sand, and you could feel the tension in the air. It was probably super uncomfortable for everyone living there. But then something huge happened that changed everything. Scar took over the Pride Lands, and suddenly it was like someone shook up a snow globe. All the lines between the two groups started to get blurry and mixed up. Some of these different lions, they decided to join Scar's side. They probably thought, hey, this guy gets us, while others were like, no way we're not going along with this. And that's where our story really starts to get interesting, because this is how the Outsiders were born. It's crazy to think about, right? Like, these lions who became the Outsiders, they actually used to live right there in the Pride Lands with everyone else, and they had this whole culture and way of life that was just different. Not necessarily bad, just different, and it all led to this big split that changed everything in the kingdom. Scar's takeover wasn't just about grabbing power. It was the moment when everything changed for our secret group of lions. When Scar stepped onto that rock and declared himself king, he turned this hidden community upside down. Imagine the scene. Lions with wide eyes and dropped jaws, some stepping back in fear, while others leaned forward with interest. Scar needed fierce, strong lions who weren't afraid to get their paws dirty. Our secret group of lions who'd always lived a little differently fit that bill perfectly. Scar saw potential in them that Mufasa never did. But not all of these lions wanted to join Scar. Some saw this as their big moment to live the way they wanted without following Mufasa's rules. They imagined hunting whenever and wherever they wanted, no more hiding in the shadows. But what about the lions who didn't like Scar's ideas? They started to push back, and that's when the real trouble began. Picture families torn apart, cubs separated from their parents, brothers and sisters on opposite sides of this huge divide. It was heartbreaking to see lifelong friends suddenly glaring at each other across an invisible line. Scar knew exactly what he was doing. The lions who joined him got the royal treatment, best hunting grounds, special privileges. But life got tough for the lions who said no to Scar. They found themselves pushed to the edges of the Pride Lands where food was scarce. Every day became a struggle to survive. As Scar's rule went on, the Pride Lands changed. The once lush savanna dried up and prey animals moved on. The resisting lions had to get creative, becoming experts at finding food in unexpected places. They learned to survive in conditions that would make other lions give up. But here's the crazy part. When Simba came back and took over the throne, things didn't go back to normal. The lions who'd sided with Scar were seen as traitors, no matter if they'd changed their minds. In Simba's eyes, and in the eyes of the loyal lions, they were the bad guys. That's how the outsiders were born, exiled to the harsh Outlands. But these lions had something special: the traditions and skills of their ancestors. What were once just quirks became the key to their survival. Can you imagine what that must have been like? One day you're part of the community, the next you're labeled a villain and cast out into a barren wasteland. The cubs born during this time grew up knowing nothing but the harsh life of the Outlands. To them, the lush Pride lands were just stories. All they knew was the constant struggle to survive. But that struggle made them strong and resourceful. The outsiders had to work together in ways the Pridelanders never did. Every hunt was a team effort, every bit of food shared. Some of them even thrived, taking pride in their ability to survive where others couldn't. They saw their exile as a challenge, a chance to prove they were stronger and tougher than the Pridelanders. But deep down, many longed for home. They remembered the green grass, flowing rivers, and abundance of prey. These memories were passed down to their cubs, keeping the dream of returning to the Pridelands alive. But what if the very skills that made the outsiders different were about to become their greatest strength? Get ready to see these lions pull off survival tricks that'll blow your mind. Life in the Outlands was nearly impossible, but these lions weren't just any ordinary pride. They were survivors through and through. The Outlands were nothing like the lush green paradise they left behind. It was a barren wasteland with hardly any water and even less food, but the outsiders had something special that set them apart from the rest. Remember how they used to hunt at night? Well, now that became their secret weapon. When the sun went down and the air cooled off, that's when the outsiders came alive. They could travel further than any other lions, searching for food in places no one else dared to go. And those fierce young cubs who learned to fight so early, they grew up to be the toughest lions you've ever seen. They could take down prey that other lions wouldn't even dream of attacking because they had to. They had no other choice. But it wasn't just about being strong. The outsiders had to be clever too. They came up with hunting techniques that no one had ever seen before. They'd use the rocky terrain to their advantage, creating hidden pits or using the cliffs to corner their targets. It was like watching a pride of lion ninjas in action. And let's talk about water, because in the Outlands, finding water was like striking gold. The outsiders became experts at sniffing out hidden water sources. They'd dig deep into dry riverbeds to find underground streams or collect morning dew on leaves before the sun burned it away. Some of the older lions even learned to read the stars and predict when and where the rare rainstorms would hit. But life for the outsiders wasn't all about just staying alive. They kept their culture burning bright, passing down their stories and traditions to the younger generations. Under the light of the full moon, they'd gather for secret ceremonies, reaffirming their identity as outsiders. They'd tell tales of their ancestors, paint the rock walls with claw marks to record their history, and teach the cubs about the lush Pride lands they'd one day return to. These ceremonies weren't just about remembering the past, they were about keeping hope alive. The outsiders would sing songs of defiance, their voices echoing through the canyons. They'd perform ancient dances that told the story of their exile and their eventual return. And through all this hardship, something incredible happened. The outsiders became stronger and more unified than ever before. They looked out for each other, sharing what little food they had, making sure no one went hungry. When a lioness was too weak to hunt, the others would bring her food. When cubs were orphaned, the whole pride would raise them together. The cubs born in the Outlands grew up tough and resilient. They learned to climb the steepest cliffs to spot prey from miles away. They could go days without water, their bodies adapting to the harsh conditions. These young lions were different from any others in the Pride lands. They were survivors from the day they were born. Now you might think you know everything there is to know about the outsiders from the movies, but let me tell you, there's so much more to these lions than meets the eye. What if I told you they had some incredible hidden talents that even Simba didn't know about? These skills were the key to survival in the harsh Outlands, and they might just change the way you think about these so-called villains. The outsiders had some of the best trackers in all of the Pride lands. They could follow a scent for days across the harshest terrain, picking up the faintest trace of prey and following it for miles. Even in the dry, dusty Outlands, where most other lions would lose the trail, their tracking skills were so good they could even tell how long ago an animal had passed by and which direction it was heading, and their eyesight was absolutely incredible. They could spot potential prey from miles away, which was a huge advantage in the barren Outlands where food was scarce. But it wasn't just their physical abilities that were impressive. The outsiders were artists too. Can you believe it? In the midst of their struggle for survival, they found a way to express themselves through art. They used the red clay of the Outlands to create intricate body paint designs that told the story of their exile and their hopes for the future. It was like they were wearing their history on their fur. Each line and swirl had a meaning, and the designs were passed down from generation to generation. And their roars, oh, their roars were something special. The Outsiders had developed a complex language of roars and growls that could communicate messages across great distances. It was like they had their own secret code. They could warn each other about danger, coordinate hunts, and even express emotions all through the power of their voices. It was a language that the Pridelanders couldn't understand, which gave the Outsiders a huge advantage in their struggle for survival. Now let's talk about the Outsider cubs, because they were something else entirely. These little lions were taught to climb from a very young age, and they became so good at it that they could scale cliffs that other lions wouldn't even attempt. It was like they were part lion, part mountain goat. They could reach places that no other predator could access, which gave them access to food and water sources that were hidden from others. But perhaps their most impressive talent was their ability to work as a team. They could coordinate hunts with a level of precision that was unmatched. It was like watching a perfectly choreographed dance. Each lion knew exactly where to be and what to do. They could take down prey much larger than themselves by working together in ways that the Pridelanders had never even thought of. It wasn't just about strength, it was about strategy and teamwork. All of these skills and talents, they weren't just random abilities. They were vital for survival in the harsh Outlands. Every single talent they developed was a response to the challenges they faced. It was like they had taken their exile and turned it into an opportunity to become stronger and more capable than ever before. Now you might be thinking that Zero was always the leader of the Outsiders, but what if I told you there's a whole secret history of leaders who came before her? It's a story that'll change everything you thought you knew about these exiled lions, and it all starts right after they were banished from the Pride Land. When the Outsiders first found themselves in the harsh, unforgiving Outlands, they were lost and scared. But then a wise old lioness named Mazuli stepped up. She wasn't fierce like Zira. Instead, she was clever and diplomatic. Mazuli had this way of bringing everyone together and making them feel like they could survive anything. She taught them how to find hidden water sources and make shelters that protected them from the scorching sun and freezing nights. But life in the Outlands was tough, especially for an old lioness like Mazuli. The harsh conditions took their toll on her health. She got weaker, and the Outsiders worried about what would happen when she was gone. That's when Jabari, a young, strong lion, stepped up. He believed the Outsiders needed to focus on getting stronger so they could one day take back their place in the Pride Land. Jabari introduced intense training sessions and organized daring raids into neighboring lands to gather food and supply. But Jabari's leadership wasn't without problems. His aggressive tactics brought trouble, and one day a raid went horribly wrong. Many Outsiders were injured and some didn't come back at all. The Pride was in chaos, and that's when Zira stepped up. Zira was something else. She had Masuli's cleverness and Jabari's strength all rolled into one. She knew how to inspire the Outsiders with her words, but she also wasn't afraid to use her claws when she needed to. Zira organized the Pride in a whole new way, combining the best of what Mazuli and Jabari had taught them. But Zira's rise to power wasn't simple. There were whispers about how she really became their leader. Some say she challenged Jabari to a fight and won. Others say she slowly gathered supporters until Jabari had no choice but to step down. And what about the Outsiders who didn't agree with Zira's leadership? There are stories of lions who left the Pride in the dead of night, never to be seen again. Zira's leadership changed everything for the Outsiders. She took all the skills they'd learned under Masuli and Jabari and turned them into something fierce. Zira had this vision of returning to the Pride Lands not just as survivors, but as conquerors. She kept the memory of Scar alive, telling stories about how great he was and how unfairly they'd been treated. Zira turned the Outsiders' pain and anger into a weapon, sharpening it day by day. The Outsiders had a whole other side to their society, hidden rituals, secret languages, and traditions that shaped every part of their lives. It's a world that's been right under our noses this whole time, and it's way more complex than anyone ever imagined. They had their own creation myth, totally different from the Pridelanders. They believed the first lions were born from the sun and the earth. This belief shaped everything about how they lived their lives, from the moment they woke up to when they went to sleep at night. Every morning when the sun came up, the Outsiders would gather to greet it with a special roar. It was like they were saying hello to their ancestor. During eclipses, they had amazing rituals where they'd paint themselves with red clay and dance under the darkened sky. They believed it was a time when the sun and earth were reuniting and they could ask for blessing. The Outsiders had a really cool naming tradition where cubs weren't given their true names until after their first successful hunt. Can you imagine growing up without a real name? It was like they had to earn their identity and prove they could contribute to the Pride before they were truly accepted as part of it. They had this whole secret language, but it wasn't just roars and growls. It was all in how they moved their bodies. They had these super subtle ear flicks and tail movements that could say all sorts of things without making a sound. It was like they were talking in code right in front of other animals and no one would even know. The Outsiders had a totally different view on leadership than the Pridelanders did. They believed that any lion could challenge for leadership at any time. Can you imagine what that would be like? It meant their leaders always had to be on their toes, always proving they deserved to be in charge. It created this society where being strong and clever was super important because you never knew when someone might try to take your place. Their music was something else. They used these low rumbling growls as a baseline for their songs, creating melodies that you could feel through the ground more than hear. It was like their whole bodies were part of the music, and they'd use it to tell stories about their history and their hopes for the future. The Outsiders also had this really intense system of rites of passage that every young lion had to go through to be considered an adult. It wasn't just about hunting or fighting, it was about proving you understood the outsider way of life. There were tests of endurance where young lions had to survive alone in the harshest parts of the Outlands for days, and tests of wisdom where they had to solve riddles passed down through generations. All of these traditions and beliefs weren't just random stuff the Outsiders did for fun, they were all about survival. These customs gave the Outsiders a super strong sense of who they were and what they were fighting for. It kept them together when everything else was falling apart. Wow, can you believe it? We've uncovered so much about the Outsiders that we never knew before. It's like a whole new world has opened up right before our eyes. Now that we know about their incredible survival skills and rich traditions, it makes you wonder how different things could have been if the Pridelanders had taken the time to understand them instead of exiling them. What if Simba had reached out and learned about their unique ways? Maybe they could have worked together to make the Pridelands even better and stronger than before. The Outsiders' story is like a phoenix rising from the ashes, showing us that there's always more to learn if we keep our minds open. It's like the Pridelands are full of mysteries just waiting to be solved, and who knows what other amazing things we might discover if we just take the time to look and listen.